Hear ye, the podcast commencing forthwith doth contain 80s synth, woodwind spiders, and violent bunnies as we explore Bardcore during this season of Ren Festruary, here on Created Things. Nani, good folk, and welcome to this very medieval edition of Created Things, the only arts podcast hosted by two yeomen, whatever that is. I am your host, artist. Yeah, yo, man. I am one of your hosts, artist and psychotherapist, Jacob Flores Popcheck. With me, as ever, is the infinitely qualified medievalist, Catholic priest, yo bro, Father Gabriel Torretta. How you doing, sir?
I feel infinitely qualified, if by that you mean any claim to expertise is infinitely qualified.
So just a lot of caveats.
Just a lot of caveats. A lot of like, well, in a manner of speaking, well, asterisk, footnote, probably not.
I mean, we've been doing this podcast a long time, and I still don't feel like we've quite ever ironed out our intros to be like succinct and elevator pitchy enough.
No, not really.
Like, artist and psychotherapist, medievalist and Catholic priest. Like it inspires more questions than it offers answers.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the goal of our podcast, to unsettle by inspiring.
Yeah, was that? I think it's Flannery O'Connor who it's attributed to. I don't know. It actually comes from her, but the whole Christ came to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. We really lean into the afflicting the comfortable thing.
At least we begin with ourselves. So that's the best I can say. Well, that's yes.
I'm a wildly afflicted and deeply uncomfortable person.
Yes,
Everybody
exactly.
is.
And a yeoman. So I figure like at least this is honest,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Are you drinking from an entire wine bottle?
No, it's a water bottle. I've been doing this for 3 months, please.
I don't often see you just swig from a giant. Video viewers of this podcast will knock a clock that he just drank from a giant green bottle of what looks to be absinthe. Quite frankly,
it does.
He says
it is however Waldquelle, which you can believe me or not to be water, but it's do what you want.
Yeah, you heard it here first. Father Gabriel drinks absinthe through the entirety of
just straight from the bottle. Recording. Actually, that you know what? If next episode is a little bit trippy, you'll. Anybody who listened to this episode has the answer key.
Episode. A lot of our episodes are recorded quite late for you, at like 11 p.m. or midnight for you, and because of being in Austria, and you are known to get quite punchy.
There's some.
So I think
adding gets punchy towards the end.
Would be would be making that punch a little bit more literal, but I'm here for it. Speaking of yeomen, I want to welcome our guest, a yo woman, if that's a thing. I'm super excited about this conversation. This is one of those that's like a dream guest for us. And the fact that it's kind of a dream guest for us really represents how just incredibly, almost toxically nerdy we are. But yeah, without further ado, I want to welcome to this conversation just a really phenomenal musician and a big thing in the Bardcore scene. If anybody knows what that is, please welcome the artist who goes by Hildegard Von Blingin.
Hello, thank you. I'm so flattered. Could someone tell me what a yeoman is very quickly?
Yeoman's one of those medievally words that people just use. I mean,
like ye old.
Yeah. No, I could tell you way too much about ye old. I'm not going to, because that would be a total distraction.
Actually, yeah.
But we interrupt ourselves to be hyper correct about ye oldie.
I've put you on the spot. Sorry.
Yeah, yeoman. I'm afraid I feel like I should know what that is.
I knew Robin Hood was supposed to be a yeoman. I thought it had something to do with like a status, like military rank, but I could be totally off base. It's just a word that's thrown around a lot at Renaissance festivals, which is my whole introduction to kind of the medievalism that Father Gabriel is, as previously mentioned, infinitely qualified to discuss. My artistic mentors were all the kinds of crackpots and freaks who slum it at Renaissance festivals to make ends meet during the low seasons. And So that's what I contribute to Father Gabriel's academia.
My type of people.
Plop weird.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I did a very quick Google just because I don't want to appear uneducated here, but it looks like a yeoman is usually a landholder, but could also be a retainer, guard, attendant, or subordinate official. I came to it through the opera Yeoman of the Guard, which my father's a singer, and he was in a production of that. I think I was not yet born, but which explains why I don't know what it is. But there you have it.
But there it is. Although, to be honest, I mean, you know the way opera works. Like, even if you had seen it, or in fact starred in it, it doesn't mean that you would necessarily have any greater clarity about what the heck a yeoman is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we've kind of hit on what Bardcore is. I feel like it has the trappings of medievalism, or at least the medieval ideas, but we don't always know what we're doing. So I do want to say right off the bat, let me couch too. I don't have a degree in history or anything like that, so I came to this as I know as a complete nerd. Well, my brother does make appearances on my channel though, and he has a degree in history and linguistics, so I rely heavily on that.
yeah, come on, that's good enough. Mm-hmm. That's so
there
great.
you go. Well, you've set up the bowling pins for this quite nicely, which is that we do. So this whole episode is on kind of Bardcore. You are our expert here today. Why don't you take a stab at just, for those who are completely unindoctrinated on this, take a stab at sort of defining this a little bit for us.
Well, yeah, let me have a stab at it for sure. So Bardcore, I would say, began in, gosh, it's been a blur. I want to say the lockdown of 2019. Mm-hmm. That's when all of this began. I think the world was at a pretty big low point, and I was unemployed. And my compatriot Cornelius Link, who kind of, I like to say, started it all off in that year, was also down on his luck, or at least at home. We were all at home, and we had nothing but time on our hands. So he put out a video of the coffin dance. It has an actual name, but it's known as the coffin dance in medieval style.
Oh.
You're familiar with the one? Yeah.
yeah, it went pretty big on TikTok, if it's the same one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it blew up, and then somebody also created an animation for it. It was almost like a crowdsourced trend of a number of monks carrying a coffin. And I saw that, and I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. And then I realized that he'd also made an instrumental medieval version of Pumped Up Kicks, and that's kind of where it started. I was like, well, this could use some vocals, and there were some other versions floating around, but I wanted to have a stab at it myself. So I created some vocals for it with my brother, who goes by Friar Funk. And we put that up there. We also did a couple other covers, and suddenly it all kind of snowballed. I think the algorithm just blessed me. I'm very lucky that it picked them up. And it wasn't called Bardcore yet. People didn't know what to call it, but somebody coined it. I don't know who. I did see a comment at one point, someone declaring, this is Bardcore. And maybe that was the originator of that word, but it stuck. People also call it tavern wave sometimes, but to put it more succinctly, Bardcore is a pastiche genre. It falls under the blanket of medievalism because it is about taking modern songs and kind of old-timeying them up. There's nothing particularly accurate about it. And to be honest, it bears more in common with Renaissance music than actual medieval music, which was more monophonic generally. But yeah, and then it takes Elizabethan-inspired lyrics, which is a later period altogether, and smushes it all together for something that feels kind of old and vaguely medieval, something you might encounter at a fair, but a modern fair where you can see like stormtroopers wandering around and people not in costume.
Right, stormtroopers eating turkey legs or something.
Exactly. It's not like I'm speaking from experience here.
This is purely hypothetical. Okay, yeah, this is the realm of hypothetical.
Exactly. There's like a fairy over there and a samurai over there and a naked guy in a tub over there. That did happen in Germany.
Of course it did. Of course it did.
I was scarred for life.
Oh man.
That's
yeah, Renaissance Festival can get wild.
Yeah,
I love
they
them.
do. Yeah, there's a really amazing one in Germany. I forget the name, Mittelalterlich Spektakulum. I'm butchering it, but it was like the size of 3 football fields put together. So my mind was blown. We don't have much like that here.
No, that's amazing. That's really remarkable to hear your narration of the beginning of this. You know, like approximately, what is it? 9.6 million other people. Somebody right after the Pumped Up Kicks video was released, like one of my friends sent this to me, and then like a couple minutes later, my godson, who I promised him I would tell, my godson is 16 years old. He is your hugest fan. And so if you wonder why suddenly you have a weird concentration of listens coming from Texas, that's probably why. So
thank you, godson.
He's the best. So anyways, like I was like getting multiple people like sending this thing to me within like 30 seconds.
Thank you.
Okay, which is great. And then I went and of course, like this was totally new. I have to be totally frank. Your version was the way that I discovered that Foster the People is a band. You're
the worst person I've ever met.
So there's no recognition there.
Yeah,
when you heard it was like, this is a new song.
Yeah, I listened to that. I was like, this is such a cool song. Like, this is such. So like, it's funny because to me, when I first heard this was not like, oh, this is like a cool kind of like medievally Renaissance-y, Elizabethan-y kind of like stormtroopery cover of this like popular song. It was just like, this is a jamming song that is so good. And like, I kept listening to it. It's like, this is so good. And then I found out, oh, this is a cover of something. And then I listened to the original song and I was like, this song is terrible. Which says a lot about me, I guess. But
it says a lot about you. I want to be clear that I did not have that same experience because I feel the need to distance myself as far from your shelteredness.
No, feel free. I do literally live in a monastery, so just be cool.
Yeah.
But it was interesting kind of watching this unfold because I was like looking at some of these comments unfolding and like I have this like really clear visual memory of that comment person saying like basically something like, I dubbed this Bardcore, and it was like, huh. I wonder if this is actually where that came from. So it's sort of delightful to know that whether that really is or not, it may as well have been where this came from.
Could be. That's fascinating that you came to that song sort of in the reverse order, but it does happen. I draw my covers from a lot of different sources, and not everyone has heard all the originals. So many people, you're not alone, are hearing my version before they hear what I've covered. Because it ranges from like Taylor Swift to Radiohead, so
right.
Yeah, no, it's a huge array. It reminds me of my own experience, like as a very young. Again, we've established this is probably our nerdiest episode, so I have no weirdness in sharing this. But as a very young little dorky kid, it reminds me of my experience listening to Weird Al for the first time, where I go like, "Holy shit! There's another song that uses the same." Like, music is Amish Paradise? Like, what?
Adorable.
Like,
that version is so good, though. Yeah,
it is legitimately.
I must say, big influence. I love Weird Al.
Legit.
Yeah, how do you feel about being spoken about in the same hushed tones as Weird Al Yankovic?
It's a dream come true, for real. Yeah, he kind of paved the way.
Yeah, but I mean, he did, but like there are a lot of people who do this kind of thing, or who make like whether it's parody stuff or like things inspired by or whatever. Let me just at the beginning, like let me just call out something that I think is worth attending to. Like, so I mean, basically anybody since the internet was like a thing, like, well, really, especially since like 2005, since YouTube and stuff, like, anybody who's had like any kind of like wherewithal with technology at all, like, feels him or herself talented enough to like become a star and then like wants to become a viral, or, as the grandma say, or whatever. A viral. That's, my grandson is a viral. which is a good thing.
Is he
now.
okay?
Actually, I think he's in the hospital. He's in the 9 million people are looking at him in the hospital. I'm very confused why this is a good thing, but he's very proud of it. Anyway, it's like, so everyone sort of wants to like whatever be a star, get this like magic thing, and this, and you duly pointed out at the outset that like there is some certain like magic about the algorithms and these things with YouTube and whatever. I mean, but we can't overlook the fact that you're actually an extremely good singer, and a good composer, and that these things actually work musically, right? So like, this is ultimately Weird Al's great genius, is that he's not a trick. He's a phenomenal musician who makes genuinely interesting musical compositions that then like play on and expand the like horizon of possibility with music that people already like. Or he takes music people don't like and turns it into something that they do like. And this has been my experience, is that this is the kind of remarkable thing that your music has already actually done for me, because many of the songs that you cover, I don't like the original versions, but I like yours great. And I guess I would just like to talk a little bit about frankly the musical difficulty involved in this, So if you'd be willing to just talk about your musical background, vocal training, compositional background, kind of whatever you're feeling that musically, like the ingredients that have like poured into this, that have given you, that you've been able to kind of capitalize on the way that you have.
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to speak to that. I feel like I also just want to mention that that while the genre is sort of believed to have come out of 2019, there have been people doing this for a long time, as you probably know. If you go on YouTube, there are people. I'm having trouble having names come to mind, but there's a wonderful musician I worked with called Algal the Bard.
Oh yeah, I love Algal the Bard. He's so
incredibly talented. He's a multi-instrumentalist. I'm so happy I got to work with him. But I believe that he was already posting this sort of thing before that time. It's just that the algorithm truly picked it up when Cornelius came on the scene, and that's kind of when I feel like the mashup of the Elizabethan-inspired lyrics and the music came about. And I mean, even sort of like famous celebrities like Sting were doing sort of medievalist stuff. Like he had a whole album of John Dowland, which I can't call Bardcore, but it was an interesting... I
mean, his Christmas album was recorded in like a castle even older than Father Gabriel's with no heat, just so he could make his voice sound like... deep enough to mimic a whale because he was so cold. So yeah, Sting definitely deserves some mention in this conversation.
Exactly. There you go. My grandma's such an elitist when it comes to that sort of thing. I love her, but she's like, ugh, that's not Dowland.
I confess, I'm a complete Dowland snob, so I have no interest in listening to Sting's Dowland.
So yeah.
Actually, this is one of my first fights with Father Gabriel where we got good and proper actually mad at each other, was when I was trying to convince him that Sting's a really good artist, and he just dug his heels in and insisted he was the dumbest thing ever. So you're hitting on an ongoing trigger point for us.
Well, maybe I better speed past that one, but yeah. All that aside, I just want to sort of I don't want to act like it came out of nowhere.
Sure.
There's been a lot of observations that it came about, Bardcore that is, at the same time as our Great Plague.
Right.
And people keep drawing these comparisons to, the Black Death, which is an interesting choice. But I do think that there was a global phenomenon of people really not knowing what to feel about all of this. And so I can't sort of talk about Bardcore without talking about that. But from the musical perspective, I can definitely get into that. So my background is that I grew up singing classically. I sort of covered everything, like art, song, light opera. And then near the end of my training in my late teens, I honed in on early music, like Baroque. And then a little bit earlier, I wasn't dabbling in medieval that much, but I did sort of realize that my voice suited that style of music. And I always had this frustration that I couldn't really sing pop or rock. I found that my voice had no edge. And after training for so many years in this style, I felt kind of stuck in it. And it turns out that wasn't such a bad thing, because I feel like it just sort of, it works when I'm taking a modern song and trying to make it sound a little bit older. A lot of it is just that I'm approaching it from a style that you would never sing these songs. You'd sound ridiculous if you went to karaoke and you sang like this. Not that it's incredibly authentic, but I do find that there are sensibilities for singing that apply here, such as sort of not scooping a lot,
Right.
Having a control over the vibrato in that you might have vibrato on a held note, but also you know when to cut it out and sing more in the style of like a boy soprano, and so on. So that was how I approached it from a vocal perspective. I am a very novice musician when it comes to actually playing the instruments, though. So if you've followed my channel, you may have sort of watched me go from very rudimentary stuff to something a little bit more accomplished, I hope, because I've been working very hard to be able to create my own instrumentals. And I now have a huge collection of Irish whistles and recorders, and I'm sitting behind. Let me see if you can hear this. Did any of that come through?
I heard a little bit. I heard a harp stroke.
Yeah, that was my harp. I'm just sitting beside it.
Oh, amazing.
That's awesome.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Don't mind me. I'm just sitting beside my harp.
Just sitting beside
harp.
my harp. Well, it's funny though because
awesome.
it's such a good resonator that when I want to record vocals, I have to put it outside in the hall, and people are tripping over it.
That's
well,
amazing.
I record in my bedroom.
Sure,
and
yeah,
I have
right.
a lot of instruments stuffed in here. I've got like a guitar and a mandolin, and my flutes are on the floor, which is a bad idea. I did once get a spider lay its eggs inside my recorder. So
Okay, that is the worst.
God.
Oh
sorry,
my,
I should have
oh my
trigger warning
gosh.
that.
This is like
Can I
like
go
my
back
terror
and say
when I
trigger
live.
warning spiders?
Yeah, that's right. Trigger warning spiders.
So sorry. Yeah, it was
That's
that is
amazing.
the most horrifying thing that ever happened to me in the process of this. But
I love that.
yeah, right. Problems you didn't know you were going to have. Now I've sidetracked myself.
No, you're
But
fine.
yes,
It feels like a very medieval problem to have spiders pour out of your
Doesn't
wood.
it? Yeah.
So.
Actually, that's true. Yeah, this is very genuine. Yeah.
maybe it happened to them. I'm sure it did. It's a lovely little dark place for. Well, I'm not going to think about it. Anyways, yeah.
The whole episode just takes a hard left turn, and it's just talking about like spider
It's
culture.
therapy. I'm just crying. You're helping me through it.
It's okay.
Hey,
just
I'm
handle it.
technically qualified.
There,
That's right.
please.
Technically qualified.
Help me. But yeah, so these are the instruments that I have in real life, I could say. And then I also have a large library of really great virtual instruments, because I don't like to discriminate between them, although I do think that some real instruments just are hard to fake. Like I don't use virtual flutes.
That's not going to work.
Yeah,
It's just,
and I can't blame anyone who does.
No. It's just it has a distinctive sound. I mean, if you
Exactly,
it's just a distinctive sound.
Yeah, some things are harder to sort of imitate than others, but I love my virtual instruments because it gives me access to things I can't play. Like I can't do bowed instruments. That's not something. I think there's a limit. I'm not Algal the Bard. Like again, he can play everything, and I feel like every month he's got a new one.
Yeah, he's sort of the Bardcore Brendan Urie a little bit, just being able to pull out every single instrument.
So where was I? Yeah, my virtual instruments. Yes, so a lot of people on the scene, I think, work entirely with MIDI and virtual instruments, and I think it's harder than it looks to actually make it work, because you have to sort of inject a lot of natural like texture into it, and that's tough. It's really easy for it to get stiff or lack expression, because I think it is hard to beat like a live performance of something. But when you're one person, or at least when you're me, you got to lean on virtual drums and so on. And I have like some great viola da gambas. Luckily, they're sampled very beautifully. I should share which one it is. I get a lot of emails that are asking, and it's not like a trade secret. It's called Medieval Era 2. Eduardo, I can't remember the name. Maybe this is where you can pop up a link. Not sponsored, but yeah, they're by... I'm forgetting now so badly. Medieval Era 2, and I also have Dark Era, which is sort of more Vikings flavored. They're really wonderful instrument libraries. So I throw those together, and in terms of how I pick the songs, that's a question I get a lot. I try to look for songs that are popular enough to make some kind of splash, but also would hopefully work in this style. There's a lot of songs that I start and then don't finish because I realize they're just not going to fit. And a lot of the time that's because they have too many modern elements to them, like in terms of like the mode they're in, or like a lot of dissonance or sort of jazz elements. It's really hard to massage those into something that sounds right. But sometimes you don't know until you start it. Like I started a Billie Eilish song and gave up.
Oh, nice.
I started a 21 Pilots one. What was it? Heathens. I thought that would be a cool, even like a Post Malone one. Hollywood is Bleeding. I was making Jerusalem is Bleeding based on the Crusades.
Oh, cool.
I was so proud of the lyrics,
but
it wasn't working.
He has an incredible music video that's very for Circles, where he's just in like the full suit of armor, just walking through kind of the apocalypse. I feel like you could definitely have some fun.
Totally. And like I'd love to cover something of his at some point because he's a big nerd like me. He plays Magic the Gathering and I also do.
Classic.
So it feels appropriate, but I haven't quite figured out which one would work yet. I do find that like R&B and rap can be tough. I'd love to do more, but if the melody is kind of I don't want to say monotonous, but sort of like single note or simple, that can be a tricky thing to adapt. So, like, for instance, Dolly Parton's Jolene was so easy. It wrote itself.
Okay. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Because, of course, it's like she comes from, like, a folk background, and folk evolved from, like, European medieval music. Like, there's this unbroken lineage that you can find, of course, with influences from Middle Eastern music. I want to nod to that. But yeah, that one was easy. But Last Christmas, for instance, was tricky.
Yeah, I bet. Mm-hmm. Are there besides the folk thing? Are there other elements that when you're just listening to Spotify or the radio for yourself, and a song happens to come on, and it perks your ears up to go, oh, this could really work. Mm. Like, what are besides the folk thing, what are some of those other signifiers that get you to tune in that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beyond the music, I definitely pay attention to lyrics. Because if a song is very repetitive, often there won't be space for me to do something fun with the lyrics.
Oh, right.
A lot of the time, it's not just saying like thee, thou, thus, like adding all of that. I think occasionally it's more like that because it's already so close to what it needs to be that I don't need to make many changes, but I do love putting a spin on the story. So, for instance, right now I'm working on Hurt.
Oh my gosh.
9 Inch Nails.
That is sick.
That's exciting. I'm not going to lie. That's very exciting. Yeah. That's a song I legitimately know.
I love it. Wonderful. Yeah. So I'm far enough along that I feel comfortable sharing that. And the spin that I'm taking on it is kind of strange, but like I hurt myself today. Just those lyrics weren't gonna. I couldn't think of a way to make it work until I thought of this idea for a character who's kind of like oh boy, this is really showing my hand. Like a lich lord, an undying person who's maybe cursed with undeath. And so I've changed the lyrics to, I fell upon my sword to see if I could die. I woke upon the morn and still I was alive. So it's pretty far from what it was, but now I have this sort of story in my head that I want to do justice to the original, but also I'm not trying to just sort of repeat what's already been done.
I can't even tell you how excited I am about that. That's amazing.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
I as you're sort of talking about this, my mind is going in a bunch of different directions, but I want to hit on the folk thing that you were talking about some more, mm-hmm. because and this phrase you used where you're saying there's this sort of unbroken lineage, and obviously that's true, right? Like for listeners, I want to give a shout out to an amazing singer by the name of David Coffin, who does some really incredible like sea shanty type stuff, and he recently did like a cover of Times They Are a Changin', which is, you know, I mean, Dylan is just hugely influenced by all this stuff, right? So it works really well. But as someone who, you know, did kind of grow up in the, not so much, I mean, like, I'm pretty new to, you know, sort of you mentioned the Lich King, I'm pretty new to sort of D&D and things of this sort, but like through the kind of artists and actors and weirdos that I was slumming it with, I grew up kind of on the Ren Fest scene. And, you know, the thing that I was always sort of both in love with and kind of annoyed by was that at those sorts of places, you would mainly see Celtic music being done. The medieval music and Celtic music were just sort of assumed to be kind of the same thing as far as most people would care. So you'd get a lot of, you know, Irish Rover, and you'd get a lot of, you know, well, just like a lot of the Pogues style drinking songs.
Yeah.
And the first time I was aware of anybody trying to kind of break out of that was, and I think this is kind of a contribution to the etymology, the Bardcore thing too, was in the metal scene, where you see a lot of like German metal bands and Irish metal bands specifically in the early 2000s. Like I'm thinking of groups like Powerwolf. Tyre is like a Viking metal band out of Iceland. TYR, like these kinds of guys doing these similar to what you're doing, where there's this amalgamation of kind of everything that people understand about the Middle Ages, but not so much the 1800s Celtic thing that a lot of the more Renfesty people were going with. And I'm thinking specifically of this interesting cross-section between very, very religious imagery. I mean, specifically, you know, Powerwolf, despite not being religious, is using a ton of religious imagery and singing about the Virgin Mary and things like this, but in the same breath singing about werewolves and undeath and all these kinds of things. And I feel like a lot of those quote unquote hardcore groups were the first ones sort of exploring that space in a modern way. And then, I mean, that's my theory anyway, that then that gives way to sort of the slightly more aping of historical convention Bardcore. But I do think it is interesting, and I would love for you to comment specifically, because you've mentioned a couple times, you know, the Elizabethan language that you sort of brought to the mix and things. I'd love to hear more about the different musical and even traditional influences that are inspiring you to take on these different songs that you're bringing into these different songs. Because again, I mean, my whole sort of intro into this is you get kind of 1800s Irish stuff, and you get hardcore German metal stuff, which neither one really have anything to do with the Middle Ages, but are using the themes. And then you're inventing your own spin on this. Algal and guys like this are inventing their own spin. So talk to me more about some of those influences that contribute to your chapter in that unbroken lineage that you're describing.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point there, in that a lot of what is purported to be kind of medieval now isn't really. And I do hope that when people come to Bardcore, that they can sort of sit in this space and enjoy it, but also pass through and go listen to actual, you know, ancient music and early music. And it's tough because we can't necessarily know what some of it sounded like, because musical notation was still sort of being invented like on the fly. But I have looked into musical notation a bit for my last video, because I was trying to put it in the background just for fun. But where was I? Yeah. Their influences. Thank you. Yeah, I grew up listening to a lot of actual sort of older music. We listened to, it's called the CBC in Canada. They played a lot of classical, but older as well, like Gregorian chant even, and it bears little similarity with what I do in a lot of ways. But that is why for my for one of my videos, I performed a piece by the Hildegard, because I wanted to pay homage to her. I've borrowed her name. Some people are very furious about that. They're like, "You've ruined my searches."
Stop. No, stop. Really?
Kid you not. It's very funny. Yeah, and I don't mean
ridiculous.
to. I mean, I changed the last name so that people could hopefully still find her. Her work is phenomenal, and she wrote so much.
She's the best, yeah. And
I feel like it is transportive as well. Like you can put it on, and and know that this is more or less what it may have sounded like, because it was written down. And I feel like I could have been back in that abbey just listening to the nuns sing. So I love going as far back as that. But I also, there's some modern interpretations of older songs that I really enjoy. There's a band I have to shout out called Vox Vulgaris. And they have an album called The Shape of Medieval Things to Come. I listen to it all the time. It's like awesome. Probably one of my biggest influences. There's nothing really vocal on it, but it's really cool because I feel like there's nothing stiff or pompous about it. Unfortunately, there is some elitism in the classical world. I say classical, it's sort of using a broader term there, not to refer to the classical period, but when we say it, I feel like we mean everything from like the Romantic era and backwards. So
pinky up music.
Pinky up music, yeah, and that's a shame because this is the music that everybody listened to, and I think about figures like Hildegard, and then all the way up to Mozart, who died a pauper and kind of was rejecting the status quo. This doesn't have to be the music of sort of like rich, out of touch people. We should all be able to enjoy every era of music. So I hope that people will maybe go through it and listen to the real stuff, I could call it. But in terms of like modern influences, I listen to a lot of things. You mentioned folk metal. I enjoy Sabaton.
Oh my gosh, I was so hoping somebody here was going to talk about Sabaton. I'm so glad it wasn't me, and I'm so glad we're talking about Sabaton.
No, you didn't have to. Yeah, Sabaton is great. I also really enjoy like Wardruna. I'm a huge fan of Aurora, who is, I think, one of like the best living vocalists right now. I love like Hosier, but I also listen to plenty of other stuff, like a lot of synthwave, The Midnight, Muse, all over the board. I just feel like if there's a lot of, I don't know, if there's something interesting creatively in the music, it doesn't have to be one style for it to even influence what I'm doing. So, and cinematic music, I should really mention that. I feel like that is kind of where a lot of the classical world has kind of evolved to is movie music. It's still going, and I think it's really easy to discount it. But that would be unfair. I think people like Hans Zimmer and John Williams and Alexandre Desplat are doing like really awesome stuff. Some of the soundtracks we know and love should be revered. They're doing great work, and so yeah, I'm certainly influenced by that. I think that covers it for the most part.
I mean, it's a huge amount of things. What about on a themes level? Like, again, you mentioned like the Lich thing and this Hurt cover that you're doing, but even, I mean, going back to the Pumped Up Kicks cover that that launched you into popular consciousness, what really struck me about it and what gave me like a lot of food for overthought and overanalyzation was, this is originally a song essentially about a school shooter, and that's then being pivoted into a song about a Robin Hood-esque figure who is going out like kind of on a murder spree, but is being talked about in a very different spirit because his violence is seen differently. And I feel like you could teach a whole class just on the differences in the way violence are viewed by different cultures and things like just with the bridging of those two themes in essentially the same song. Like what kinds of themes influence you, or are you drawn to when you're putting this stuff together?
Yeah, Pumped Up Kicks is an interesting one to draw attention to because there is not really a good parallel. Like the issue of school shooters is it's a tragedy of our times that I think could only exist now.
Right.
Not that murder didn't exist, but at this scale, it's something else, and that's why the song is so divisive, I think. But of course, when I was trying to make my own version, I was like, well, it can't be a 1-to-1. So I guess the bow you could say was like the gun of their times. I would maybe say crossbow is closer, but it seemed obvious and it rhymed. So sometimes I'm really constrained just by like what rhymes. But in addition to that, I do try to think about themes. And I will say that I think it's been pointed out by a professor who contacted me and we had a good talk, that a lot of the music that I'm doing now and the themes share a lot in common with the work of the troubadours.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's largely because early medieval music being quite like tied to the church, sacred and so on. Eventually, there was also more secular music, and I think there's a lot that we've lost because it just was not written down in terms of the secular side of things. But troubadours were singing all about love, courtly love, and being spurned or spurred. I forget what the word is. Spurned. That's the one. By your lover. Yeah, the green sleeves of the world. Lots of themes like that. And that's hard to avoid, I think, because so many songs now are still about that. We love singing about love and love lost. So like somebody that I used to know became a song of courtly love. The records that she took are now, it's actually now a minstrel on a wagon who's being taken away from the castle and so on. So there's lots of that. But I do also dip into religious iconography like all the time. I think because it's so evocative, and I'm glad you brought it up because I do think it's an interesting phenomenon that even in bands that are not religious, we just keep coming back to this stuff. And I think it's because it's strong. It hits a chord. It's recognizable. I use a lot of allusions to the Bible in my work as well. I think it also evokes this time, of course, because we associate the Middle Ages with the church, which makes sense. So some of it is just to like strengthen that bond and that association, but I think it's also just that there's a lot of like beautiful imagery to pull from there. I think I'm trying to remember a good example. There's plenty of that in the Bad Romance cover that I did. Forgetting my own lyrics, but I dipped into that a lot. It sort of became about sin and kind of like guiltily enjoying it and that sort of thing. Like people were reading into it. Yeah. They were almost they were doing like a queer reading of it, which was really interesting.
Oh, fascinating.
Probably because I was singing as a woman, but some of the lyrics might imply something more. Hard to say.
Yeah.
I'm just coming back to it. Let me see if I can find the lyrics that I was thinking of.
Oh yeah, you're good.
Well, now I'm struggling. If this is sin, then I shall never repent. Was one of the lines. So that sort of thing is injected all the time, I think, and I think it's because of the association with the Middle Ages, but also just because most people in the Western world have an instant, like it clicks, even if you're totally non-religious.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Just because, like, I mean, for many reasons, but one is that, the only way that like parody, pastiche, satire, homage, like any, there's a bunch of these different genres, which your work sort of incorporates in various modes. The only way they work is if there's some recognized continuity with something in like a shared consciousness, So I propose this even having come out at the very beginning and said, like, I had no idea what this song Pumped Up Kicks was. But even so, like, there's a certain shared space that I recognize that this is this is being sent to me as like a cover of something, even if I don't know what the original is. So there's at least a certain shared space of like, oh, this is a version of a thing that's been reimagined in this sort of like para-medieval universe, and there is something about that is, as you say, like like America, Canada, like many people might not be going to church, but have like these are words, they're phrases, their language. It's language. It's a way of thinking about the world that has a certain resonance and power. I mean, I think this can be abused. Like this, there's a lot of these sort of like Jake might talk about this in various ways. There's a lot of kind of like Catholic exploitation of just the sort of like, oh my gosh, spooky crucifix somewhere or like whatever, just because it's kind of resonant, it's just okay. It's a resonant thing. Yes. But it doesn't surprise me that like, that this language, these ideas, these words, like that there's something here that, it's a symbolic language that has a force of its own that like I can see it forms a community and and a listening community that shares concepts and words as well as to some extent values is what like parody, pastiche, and satire of any kind have to have in order to function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. That seems like a good segue to sort of talk about the religious element. If you wanted to sort of delve into that.
Yeah, I would kind of love to talk about a couple of different religious elements. I mean, one is cultural, and then I would love to just explore Hildegard with you too, because, of course, she's your namesake, and she's a huge influence on Father and I and my wife and lots of other people. But I want to throw out just a thought on the Bardcore approach to this specifically, because as an artist who is Catholic specifically, and I'm curious what your experience of this is, Hildy, and yours, Father. My experience kind of growing up with any media or event like a Renaissance festival or a medieval movie would sort of exclusively depict Catholicism in that sort of spooky crucifix, really negative way, right? I mean, I think about how most modern Robin Hood adaptations, except for the absolutely perfect Disney animated one with foxes, like spends about 20 minutes just apologizing for any Catholicism in the movie and like casting, whatever African-American actor is most popular at the time to play a token Muslim, sort of offset any Catholicism in it and things like this. And at Renaissance festivals, right, you'd have sort of the token drunk guy as a monk somewhere and things like this. But it was always this thing was almost kind of apologized for, or like this vibe that, hey, we have to have this because this is like a part of it. We wish we didn't have to. And then in sort of this new chapter that we're calling Bardcore, kind of post-2019, whether it is in the specifically musical area or whether it's like Father Gabriel and I both talk a lot about, and I'd love to interview him someday, but I don't know, Hildy, if you're familiar on TikTok with the greedy peasant at all.
No.
But he's a costumer who is not religious at all, but as far as I know, but like almost exclusively plays with like the history of relics and vestments as his like primary inspiration for being fabulous and these kinds of things. And suddenly, religion as a motif is being used as something that's like sort of interesting and something I don't have to apologize for. And I can, at the very least, like you're talking about with your cover of Bad Romance, use as my own personal Rorschach test to express my own feelings about spirituality and morality and things like that. Or at the very most, something that can kind of work invitationally to explore, at the most extreme, a possible spiritual path for myself, and at the very least, like someone else's culture. And I think that's cool that we've split. I mean, and you even mentioned, the Middle Eastern influences on medieval music, that we're not sort of, I think we're not including, maybe I'm going too far on a limb by saying this, but like when I'm hearing a lot of sort of medievally people, Bardcore people talk about even those influences, it's not in the same apologetic way that a 90s person casts Morgan Freeman to pay a Muslim in sort of a token way. It's with a genuine respect for Islam. And I don't know, it seems like it's moving in a really positive direction towards embracing religion as a motif worthy of, if not reverence, at least respect. And I'm curious what both of y'all's experience of like representation, religious representation in medieval Anna has been, and how you personally both see it changing. I don't know. I'm very much kind of talking on my ass right now, but these are just thoughts that occur to me.
I get what you're touching on. I think, okay, well, as an outsider of the church, I should preface by saying I'm not religious. I was raised Unitarian, which is kind of like a really lovely hippy dippy kind of smorgasbord religion that very much is just like, don't hurt people, okay? You can believe what you want, don't hurt people.
You said it, not us.
Yeah. No, I feel very fondly about that community, even though I don't really go anymore. And I mean, that's kind of the downside in some ways of something like that, where it's like, if it's not very strict, you can fall away. But sure. Yeah, I think it gave me a good foundation because my Sunday school was spent talking about other religions in a lot of ways. It was sort of like, this week we're going to talk about Hinduism, and this week Catholicism. And it did have, I think, culturally Christian roots. There's no denying that. So I come from, a background that is culturally Christian. My mother's family was mostly Protestant, I want to say, German, and then Northern Irish. And my father's family was mostly Unitarian. It actually goes back a ways.
Oh, wow.
But I'm coming at this from a non-religious but somewhat spiritual angle. And I think that our relationship with Catholicism in Canada, I can speak to that a little, is a bit fraught right now, largely because of the damage it did in combination with our government to the Indigenous populations here. And
we were interviewing Judah Kozak, who is a major Indigenous Catholic bead worker in Canada. Yeah, recently.
I noticed
she was
that
talking
one.
A lot about some of those themes. Yeah, she's fantastic.
Was she from Nisga'a? I want to say. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's So I was really happy to see that you were sort of going into that, because I do think that there's a lot to be answered for here. So I want to be cognizant of that. But at the same time, I like to see the church, at least historically, represented fairly and with nuance, because it wasn't just a big evil organization. I think people like Hildegard are a great example of how there was science being done within the church and progress, art, music. Like there was a center of culture there. She was given away as a child to the church, so she didn't have like a ton of choice, but I feel like she made the most of it and was incredibly like scholarly and to my knowledge, like a really cool lady. So yeah, my preference is always to see these things handled like not in a black and white way. So I feel like it's like a good example of a primary document would be the Canterbury Tales, to sort of show how I've been influenced by Chaucer. Because he has a number of characters who are clergy, but he treats them differently. And I think it seems indicative of like what people were experiencing at the time in terms of like being disillusioned with corrupt members of the church, but also like acknowledging that there were still holy men within it and women. So like you have the monk and the friar who are very corrupt. They're taking bribes. All they care about is themselves. They're selfish. And then you have the parson, who is like the only devout person amongst them. And I read this back in high school, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting that you can see, like, I get why Protestantism came about in this great dissatisfaction with how the church was running things. But of course, I think it's not inherent to religion. I think it's just there's this human element going on. Well, now I'm really going on a limb here, but yeah.
You're good.
Yeah, no, I see throughout history, I think it's just like if any group gets enough power and money, you're going to have bad apples. So.
Sure.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sure.
I actually did, I want your thoughts on this, but just on the Chaucer thing, one of the earliest, when I was like 13, I wanted to figure out like what are some of the earliest Robin Hood stories. And I think representing this idea that of sort of religiosity in the medieval imagination, and like how we can approach that now, whether we're religious or not. Like one of the earliest Robin Hood stories is Robin Hood is supposedly like sitting in his tree and he's praying the rosary, like very fervently praying the rosary. And he hears a monk walking down the street, like walking on the road below him. And he gets very annoyed that his rosary has been interrupted. So he drops down out of the tree, beats the shit out of the monk, takes all his money, and then goes back into the tree to finish his rosary.
Yes!
And if that's
what
not
nice
Catholicism,
guy.
I don't know what is.
That's so amazing. That's so incredible.
I don't know that one. That's rough.
I mean, yeah, some of these early stories, they're raw, you know. But like, I love
there's inspiration for your next pumped up kids.
Robin Hood beating up a monk.
Exactly.
Devoutly, though.
But very devoutly, yeah. Then going back to his prayers, very devoutly. I love that you mentioned Chaucer because like, because he's himself such a great mix. Like he's such a great sort of like current that gets sort of like flooded into the contemporary kind of like English speaking mind, even if like to the extent that people have read him or whatever, but there's always these contexts, you know, some kind of connection with him.
Yeah, it's there, it's subtle.
It's
even
there,
if it's only
you know?
in A Knight's Tale, but I feel like many people have seen A Knight's Tale, and there you go, that's Chaucer.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and it's ish. Because why not? But it's, you know, it's like, that's funny. I'm glad you mentioned it because I was feeling that kind of a jam from your music already, so that makes a lot of sense. But like, you know, there's this wild, let me just like do a historical, like medieval nerd out for a second, because you mentioned like continuities in this interesting, like folk music, some of these things adapt really easily. Like, well, so Chaucer, it's great that you mentioned these sort of like this, because he's got these tropes of like the corrupt monk, the corrupt friar, especially the corrupt friar. Where this comes from specifically is not per se that Chaucer had a lot of bad experiences of individual friars, which he maybe did, but in the 1250s, when the Dominicans, my guys, are brand new, the Dominicans and the Franciscans are brand new, there's all this controversy about them for various complicated reasons. And in 1254, this Franciscan writes this really overly enthusiastic and unwise book that makes very unhelpful claims about how excellent the Franciscans are. And then this diocesan priest, so a priest who's not a member of a religious order, named William of Saint-Amour, in 1256 writes this book called De Periculis Novissimorum Temporum, which is on the dangers of the last times, in which he characterizes all the friars as corrupt, greedy, relic faking, unchaste, you know, like lecherous drunks. And this was, in a way, this was a scholarly battle. I mean, they were written, these are very salacious texts, but they're basically scholarly battles. So you'd say that, well, why is that a big deal? Well, because whoever wrote the Roman de la Rose was a big fan of this book by William of Saint-Amour, and took like all the tropes about the friars and put it in the Romance of the Rose. And then Chaucer reads the Romance of the Rose, and says like, oh, I guess this is what friars are like. And then just puts that into his book. And so you have this really wild kind of like very specific, here's this one guy in Paris who just really he's just really angry at this one Franciscan who wrote a really intemperate and imprudent book, in 1256. And then and then you've got like, this is handed down to Chaucer, and then it's handed down to like the modern world. And like, this is how, these are like the ingredients that go into things like at the Renaissance Festival. How do you know that you have like a friar character? Well, it's because he's the guy holding like a jug of whiskey or whatever.
Which just goes to show, like, don't be a dick, because maybe for 10 centuries afterwards, everyone will associate
you'll ruin your profession.
With the fact that
arguably, you will ruin your whole profession. So anyway, so thanks for accompanying me on my historical journey there.
Oh, that's cool. That's neat to hear. I mean, I think a lot of our influences are just like influenced by other influences. It's a giant game of telephone. So I wasn't aware of that, but that makes sense.
It is funny because like people will talk about how this is like the particular kind of like postmodern like mode of internet, like mode of artistic creation on the internet. You know, it's like somebody else creates something and then somebody else sort of like refines it and adapts it, and then somebody else takes it and adapts it. And there are aspects of this that are unique to these media because of what's available, what's possible. But like, I gotta say, I mean, this is just always how artistic creation has worked, you know, like pastiche, satire, parody, incorporation, stealing, attribution, lack of attribution. Like this is kind of how art is made, you know?
It's always been that way. And I think we have an obsession with originality. And this makes like obviously I'm coming from a bias because what I'm doing is remixing, essentially. I do write original music, but I don't think it would have blown up the way that this did. So there is that. But I was recently reading a really great book called This Is Not a Book About Benedict Cumberbatch. I know, such a great title. But it's a book about like coming to terms with a love for fan fiction. It's also about like motherhood and losing your identity. Great book. Cool. But there's a whole section where she's talking to, I want to say like a medieval scholar, like a professor. And she discusses how a lot of the literature that they were working with back then was in a way fan fiction, because you had these archetypes like King Arthur and his knights, and people were just riffing on these same beloved characters, and they're passed down and it's refined, and we don't look at it with the same disdain that we look at fan fiction with now. But they didn't have an obsession with originality. If anything, they were like, yeah, we want to see Gawain again. Like, where's our guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my defense.
That's awesome. No, that's exactly right.
It's a really wonderful defense, because I think to kind of come full circle in the conversation, like what we determine to be kind of quote unquote medieval, or really any period, like we have to be comfortable with the fact that that's a little bit, at least culturally speaking, a living document. I mean, I'm not saying, I don't mean to make you crawl out of your skin, Father Gabriel, because you're actually a historian, right? But like at the same time, in terms of cultural expression, like what we think of as medieval is not what we thought of as medieval in the 90s. And it is not what we will think of as medieval in 10 years. And likewise, we will not think of, the Greco-Roman period, or, ancient Egypt, or the American Revolution. I mean, when you just look at even the way that in musical theater, how American history and through things like, you compare Hamilton to the musical 1776, right? And the huge shift, but also the similarities. Or you compare like Hadestown to earlier, Greek mythology inspired shows like Frogs and things like this, and how like our cultural expression of these quote unquote time periods, they're really quite large and broad and include a lot of different people, different cultures and beliefs and things, really do change, and it defies snobbery a little bit, and I think can function. I mean, ultimately, this is a podcast for artists to sort of be a source of inspiration. I think it can function in sort of an invitational way, right? Where it's inviting you to say, what do you want to contribute to this living thing that is continuing to evolve, and has been really since it was invented.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think that we get what we need from these concepts. Like everything is always going to be through the lens of our own existence. And I love to draw attention back to the medievalists of the 19th century, the pre-Raphaelites. I'm so influenced by their beautiful paintings.
Hot.
But
yes.
like there was something going on for them, and they were getting something from that too. I think like industrialization, maybe there's something there. They're stuck in these smelly cities thinking about the romantic idea of the countryside and the fashion of that time. I don't know. I think it's almost similar to what's going on now, that all of us agree generally we wouldn't give up our modern amenities here, dentistry and so on. But of course, we're romanticizing that time, I think, because they didn't have cell phones and life was a little slower, and thinking about like feasting and farms and so on. It's like all of these foreign ideas to us urban dwellers. There's something there. I think you've hit on it.
Well, and even some of the, quote unquote, like the religious stuff, the more dour religious stuff that people would resist if it were offered to them now. I mean, speaking again, G and I are both Catholics, right? Like, I think there's something even attractive about the motifs of fasting, or motifs of like moral accountability and things like this, where you might not really like it, but I think some part of us all, I would argue some part of us all longs for that, and the fruit of that, which is feeling like you're part of something larger than yourself, and all these kinds of things that in a time period of radical individualization is sort of been lost.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, I'm just looking at your background there, Gabriel, and thinking about how I'm sure there's a number of people who are not even remotely religious who are like, yeah, I could live in a an abbey or a convent or something like that, like for a little bit. Like, who doesn't occasionally wonder what it would be like just to like leave their life and go do that? I mean, people go, I think, to like Nepal once in a while and just disappear there. I feel like there's like an ennui that I think a lot of people are suffering in, I don't know, late capitalism and this like rapid change, all of our technology. There's a lot of anxiety, and I think that's part of what's going into like putting medieval ideas on a pedestal a little bit. Of course, we know it was dirty and brutal and and tough, but
what isn't?
But what isn't? Exactly. It always has been. Exactly.
Right. Yeah, I'm really glad that conversation went in this direction, because like this is a really interesting, like as somebody who works like as a medievalist, which is of course is gigantic, which is already, even as a scholarly category, is this gigantic term, and like what does it mean and all of this. So there's a really interesting kind of like increasingly important discipline within the like medieval studies, looking at what you call like medievalism. You used the term early in our conversation, so it's these the idea is contemporary views of the past, and specifically contemporary views and uses of an imagined medieval era, like a real and imagined medieval era, and like not per se asking like, well, what's accurate about this and what is wrong, like I'm going to correct you, but more just like what are the needs this is satisfying? Like, where is this going, and, like you can see, a lot of different moves, right? I mean, I think like medieval, like when I think back to my childhood and I think like medieval stuff, like, what do I think? I think like swords, movies with swords and people wearing fur boots. I think of like Willow with Willow, which is the greatest, one of the greatest films of all time. Yeah, it's absolutely one of the greatest. But these are the kinds of things I think about. And then like, and then like in the 90s and the early 2000s, especially, you get a lot of these kind of like, just sort of like, everything is dark and I'm just going to spray some poo on things. And like now we're in the Middle Ages and it's like, yeah, we did it,
How's he know he's a king?
Because he's got shit all over him. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Love that movie. Yeah.
And like,
but now, we did dip into grimdark, didn't we?
Yeah.
I mean, that means something too. We're getting something from that too.
Yeah. And like, but now we're in this interesting mode where like, we're getting this very different kind of interest in the Middle Ages, So like, I mean, you just did a video for a theme song for a video game about making illuminated manuscripts, like
Inculinati.
Right? This would not have happened 10 years ago. Like, even like technology and stuff aside, like just the perception of interest in like kind of actually medievally things, like the process of being, or even being the imagined process of being a scribe and an illuminator would just not have been interests, like suddenly these are.
Yeah, and maybe that's just because we all have more access. It's hard to say. I do feel like all of this knowledge is like more accessible than it's ever been in the forms of like videos, but also scans, and all these archives have so much to look at. Like that's where I'm getting my art for my videos a lot of the time. So I think a lot of it is just that it's been not like democratized, but it's available now. And even if sometimes it's kind of warped, like in the case of the covered in muck peasants that we're discussing here, I do love that Monty Python like got that back then. Even that, the medieval era, that there was color. They had dyes. People were dressed fabulously. They were not covered in dirt all the time. Like they cared about bathing. People can sponge bath even if they don't have showers, but it's such a pet peeve.
Well, and not to mention like the totally inexplicable to the modern imagination popularity of just group bathing. Right?
Oh yes,
this is like a huge thing.
Absolutely,
like weren't medieval people like huge prudes? No, they were religious and they took town-wide.
Yes, they loved their big group hug baths. I mean, you'll see in the what was it the video I made for. where is it? The House of the Rising Sun. It's funny that you brought that up because, my thumbnail has a picture of a German bathhouse.
There you go.
Which now we would maybe view as a den of sin, but was like totally normal back then. We have so many towns called Baden. So, it's that's something that we've become prudes about for sure. We see them as like prudish, but in so many ways we are more so.
Yeah. This is something we come back to a lot. We're just kind of by accident, It's like I feel like this isn't a theme I'm trying to make, but like just when you look, especially when you look at concrete instances in this broad map of the Middle Ages, you just realize like, wait a second, I feel uncomfortable about this, but maybe I'm the prude. I mean, just think about Hildegard of Bingen, right? Like Hildegard dictates to her priest confessor scribe like how sex works.
Yes, she was pretty sex positive.
Yeah, she has I mean, but there's all of this. There's this and she's interested in this in a biological and spiritual, and I mean for her there's everything is a praise of God. And so when she's like giving this very specific biological that's also kind of cosmological environment. It's good. It's a whole lot of everything.
I mean, her painting of heaven is like terrifically vulvic. I mean, this is
you're not wrong,
but completely conducive to her faith to the degree that like she is a doctor of the church. I mean, she's like one of like the Mount Rushmores of Catholicism as far as it goes, right? Like officially a doctor of the church in this way, where we all go, oh wow, I might be more prudish than I like to think that I am.
Yeah, it's interesting when you realize how different we are, I guess, from them, but also how similar. Like, I look at movies like The Last Duel and think about how it's interesting. It has like so much to do with our modern time, like the Me Too movement. I watched it in the theater, and I don't know if you've seen it. Maybe seen The Last Duel.
I haven't.
Oh, no. Fascinating. Yeah, it's about
I have. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So it's very much about like victims of assault and what happens when they take that into the public eye and take it to the court. And in this case, it's a real historical event that happened. And of course, they take liberties, and there was controversy about the armor. But yeah, it was about a noble woman who was assaulted and came forward with this. And of course, the duel was to determine whether she was innocent or not. So it was
between her husband and her accused assaulter.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, whoever loses this duel is the one that God is saying is right.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is insane to us, but also it felt so current somehow. And the fascinating thing is when I got out of the theater, I heard like an older man telling his wife, was that really assault though? Because it sounded like she liked it. And I was like, we sat there for that long and you didn't get it? Like,
oh my gosh.
Go back in and watch it again, because the viewpoint of the movie changes, and I believe you see the event itself at least two times. It's rough.
I think 3 times.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Oh wow. That's rough.
It's rough. It's rough. Well done. I think we needed it, but it is fascinating that it's dealing with something that happened so long ago, but it's so current still. So, yeah, I think there's themes that we're still learning from and exploring, things that happened back then, things that they deal with in a totally different way, and yet feels weirdly familiar.
Sure,
and has pros and cons. I mean, even like the idea of, I mean, at working, not to get too dark here, but like working as a psychotherapist, and I mean, a huge percentage of my clientele are like, people, men and women both, who have been sexually assaulted, and who, our governments, I think Canada's similar with statute of limitations, but just says like, no, enough time's passed, like you can't do shit about that. And like as brutal and quote unquote simple-minded as it is, like the idea of like the church, who is basically running your town, is going to say, no, like, yeah, your husband can totally go out and just like with a sword, like beat the crap out of the other dude, and we'll see what happens. And like, there's definitely downsides to that, but there are positives that we don't have. Right? Like there's something about that when I'm sitting there as a therapist listening to these horror stories, and I'm like, I wish we could go. I wish we could skip to
this. Occasionally. I couldn't blame someone for watching that and being like, yep, I would like to would like to do a barbarism.
I'd like to do it. I love that.
Let's do a barbarism.
Yeah, let's do a barbarism. Absolutely. Okay, but I brought up just really in passing this thing about the Incolinati, which is so cool. And it's such a cool, like we were talking a little bit earlier about like crossovers within like nested webs within Russian dolls,
Yes.
And it's manuscripts all the way down. So could you talk a little bit about how I don't know anything about this, how this happened, how you got anything,
Yes. Yeah, gladly. So they reached out to me, or sort of a third party person reached out to me and was like, this feels like it would be a good fit for some sort of collab. And
I'm sorry, just establish for the listener, what is this that we're talking about exactly in this game?
So it's an ink-based strategy fighting game, heavily inspired by medieval manuscripts. And it's very not stuffy. I feel like it's hitting on this new consciousness of how like goofy they were back then.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah, so marginalia is the drawings in the margins of manuscripts. So there's like rabbits with their little bare bottoms and strange snail creatures, and you can look it up there. Anyone listening, if you just look up, I think like rabbit medieval manuscript, you'll get the original stuff. But this game,
rabbits are assholes in limited manuscripts.
Right? They often have bows and all sorts of weapons. So these little beasts from real manuscripts, and now you can play them in this game. So I did it was like a sponsored content, but this is I think the first time that I've done a collab with like a company. It's not uncommon, obviously, to see ads on YouTube and sponsored content because we need to eat. But I really cared about taking something that fit and, like more power to NordVPN, but like it's hard to see like where this. I know, just interrupt my own song. I do get offers all the time to do stuff and like phishing scams and stuff. It's like, oh, we are a Riot game, and we want you to talk about our game. Here's a link. It's not suspicious. I was
great
like,
here.
Exactly, nothing's wrong. I was so excited to work with these people, and I did get to play the demo, and I was like, this is really fun, and I'm bad at it. But Hildegard is a character in the game.
Stop.
And
love it.
Yes. I'm forgetting who else. There's like a number of sort of like known historical figures, and then on top of that, these like little funny beasts that you draw, and that's your army. So they come to life, and it's like a sort of a 2D, like not side scrolling exactly, but it gets really chaotic at later levels. It's so smart. It's really funny. And originally they just...
It says a lot about me that this is the first game that's come out in a long time that actually makes me want to get an Xbox.
Yeah.
I've been fine with my PlayStation for a long time. I'm like, do we need an Xbox?
Yeah, it's also...
Just for this game?
Yeah, I guess it's not coming to PlayStation, but it's also for Mac and PC. And it's like, luckily it's not a super demanding game when it comes to like your hardware. So I ran it on a laptop and it went fine. But yeah, originally they just approached me to do some sort of song with them. But they ended up partway through being like, do you want to do her voice? So I got to voice Hildegard in the game. Yeah, I just spent a day doing like death noises and grunts and stuff. Like I don't say words per se, but that was really surreal. So I got to be a voice actor in the game itself, and then I created this song that I don't know how it's going to be used in the game. Perhaps in the credits, perhaps not at all. There wasn't a ton of space for it, but it's still like I was very happy to get the word out about the game because I just think it's so much fun and it's so original. So I created the song "Beasts of Yore," and it all kind of came full circle because in the end I realized that instead of making something purely from scratch, I was like, well, there's this really great like 12th century song called Mayadin Lederschien. Oh, my God. My mom would be so disappointed in my German pronunciation here. But so by Neidhard von Reuntel. It's a great song. It's like really a romp. It's very upbeat. I think it's easy to think that medieval music was all like slow chant, but this one's, it's super fun. So I took the basis of that song and then made my own chorus, and I created some new words in my typical sort of Shakespearean-ish style. But then I butchered some Latin for the chorus, and that was a lot of fun.
Love it.
Yeah, because of course it's Latin is that thing that like we instantly associate with that time, but so few of us actually know how to speak now.
Right.
But I feel like you hear it and you get it. So I'm sure that any expert looking at it would be like, well, that's not wrong, or that's not right. But yeah, I'd sort of put some Latin-ish flair on there.
That's so awesome. Well, if it makes you feel any better, I have listened to the song, and I am a Latinist, and it didn't immediately catch my eye that this is like horrifyingly wrong. So
yay!
I'll go back later with a red pen and see how it strikes me. But I won't tell you. Don't worry.
Stamp it and move on.
Everything seems like basically an A. Moving on.
Thank you. You heard it here.
That's right. AP credit, yes.
So this is a huge accomplishment for you, and I'm so happy that you got to do this.
Thank you.
On that note, in that spirit, as we sort of begin to unfortunately conclude this conversation, just for time's sake, I think we could all easily talk for hours on all these different themes. But in that same spirit, a question I often like to ask when we're able to get interesting artists from all over the place is like what your dream projects are, like not necessarily even like what's coming up, but like just like stuff even 10 years down the road that you would love to see your music or your art form working up to, bucket list kind of things. I mean, you've now done the theme song for a video game, which I feel like is on most or a lot of like more nerdy people's like us bucket lists, but like what else is there for you that you're really hoping to nail?
More like games. I love them. I love the collaboration that goes into them. So more of that would be great. Maybe movies to some degree. More collabs with other musicians. I'm always sort of happy to do that. I had a great collab with Whitney Avalon recently, who does really great parody herself. We did Holding Out for a Hero together.
Right.
So that was like so gratifying to work with someone. She's like whip smart, and sometimes I feel like I'm in a bit of a cave here by myself. So working with other people, it like rejuvenates the creative process so much. So more of that. I'm just trying to sort of continue to make covers. There's so much music that I could do, so I feel like it's kind of endless. But one day it would be great to start releasing originals. And I really enjoy doing covers of other sort of nerdy stuff. Like I'd love to touch on some of the Witcher music.
Sure.
More Game of Thrones. There's stuff coming out all the time. But I like to keep a small, low key life in some ways, which is why I've never done a face reveal or anything. I enjoy my privacy. I discovered a while ago that I prefer recording to performing. Because
So we're not going to see you on the Renaissance Festival circuit anytime soon.
Perhaps not. I've had a lot of offers. I just find that I have a healthier relationship with music if I can do it sort of in the comfort of my home anonymously.
Sure. We got to interview Cast in Bronze, which is this like amazing carillon. He plays a carillon, this like giant bell machine. It's the only transportable one in America, and he did the Renaissance Festival circuit. And for the same reason as he always wore like a big Venetian mask and
funny.
like a black like morph suit underneath it, so no one knew who he was.
Like a medieval dead mouse.
Yeah, exactly, like a medieval dead mouse. And then actually in prep for this episode, I was doing some research into other people who've done the Renaissance circuit, and apparently Jason Mraz from like I'm Yours started on the Ren Fest circuit.
Stop it, really?
Fascinating.
He was the shirtless guy selling pickles at the Minnesota Renaissance Fair for like many years.
No, just kidding. Nicely done. That's rad. Well, we all come from somewhere.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, exactly. So maybe you can collab with Jason Mraz or at some point.
Yeah.
On a song about pickles. That'd be great.
Yes. Back to his roots.
Exactly.
That'd be super cool though. With collabing as a focus that you want to get into down the road, for artists listening, who would like to experiment with, as I was saying before, sort of contributing their own bit to the living creature that is what medievalism and that living document. What advice would you have for either musicians or artists or anybody like trying to get into this, whatever amorphous this is?
Yeah, I do get frequent emails from people who are like, I'm a hobbyist, I'm dabbling, how do I start? So it is kind of nice to put it all out there here. I would say start with getting a couple real instruments, and like you do need a foundation of music knowledge. I think it's great if you can read music. You don't have to, but there's lots of free DAWs like GarageBand. I can't remember a ton of other ones, but if you're on Microsoft, there's an equivalent version there. And get yourself a good pack of instruments. I started with kind of nothing. I was just using GarageBand, actually, which is like sort of embarrassing, but I feel like a tool is a tool. You don't need a ton, but I think the best advice I can give is just make the music that you want to hear, which is very much what I did, where I was like, well, this doesn't exist. I'd like to hear this cover. So in a way, like your first audience just has to be yourself.
That's gorgeous advice.
Oh, thank you.
I love it. I couldn't recommend anything. Your first audience is yourself, and I'm personally inspired by that.
Huh.
Well, I guess that'll have to be it. I kind of, next time you do some really cool shit in another video game, we're gonna have to have you come back just as a justification, because I want to talk to you about more stuff. But that is unfortunately gonna have to be all for now. So for all you listening, all you yeomen out there and yo women, please hear Hildy's advice, and don't be afraid to stretch yourself and contribute to this living document. And Saint Hildegard of Blingin pray for us. And with that in mind, go forth and create cool things.
Thank you.
This has been Created Things, a production of Art, Soul, and Mind, hosted by Jacob Flores Popchek and Father Gabriel Toretta, produced by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores Popchuk. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on this podcast and the artists featured, follow us on Instagram at Created Things Podcast, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are streamed.